Success is taxing. Even from the humblest of beginnings, anything can change once it gathers more eyes. Quiet debuts become huge events, shedding away the quaint elements that gave them endearment years ago. And no gaming property has made this more apparent than Pokémon. In its growth into one of the biggest media properties in modern history, Pokémon has become a reminder of the weight of popularity, a grueling argument across comment sections and social media alike, that Pokémon can no longer exist as a passionate piece of gaming art. The controversial quality of recent mainline installments is only the beginning, as Pokémon as a brand has eclipsed Pokémon as an artifact. But here we are, still making the case that Pokémon has some shred of artistry lingering in its bones. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome, but Pokémon still manages to capture hearts. That much is clear. I guess that's what makes New Pokémon Snap such a troubling piece of work. Not because of the corporate specters that hover around it, but because of everything accomplished in spite of that. From its innermost essence, New Pokémon Snap grips nostalgia tightly in its fist, but stands as a wondrous achievement that's just as enticing as its 1999 forebearer. Not every blemish is as thoughtfully concealed, but with the game's world crafted with such an endearing attention to detail, it's hard not to smile playing New Pokémon Snap. There's been a shocking demand from fans for a follow-up to Pokémon Snap on the Nintendo 64, but I don't think New Pokémon Snap could have culminated as cleanly without some extended time away from home. A big part of the original's appeal was seeing the Pokémon in full 3D, behaving in very animated ways that the Game Boy RPGs didn't display. It was surprising seeing a Doduo frantically run around the beachside or Electrodes rolling through the power plant tunnel. Nowadays, these types of interactions would be commonplace in any game, and perhaps a bit elementary by today's standards. But many have forgotten just how new this was to see back in 1999. If Pokémon Snap had received frequent iterations, that unexpected vibe wouldn't have been as present. For a series that's lasted this long with so many creatures on deck, it was bound to be a challenge. So yeah, it's clear as day that New Pokémon Snap has a very heavy burden to carry. It's a long-anticipated follow-up to one of the most cherished games to bear the Pokémon name, but it also has to find some semblance of nuance to bear the new title as well. The irony in all of this is that New Pokémon Snap, from a mechanical standpoint, does very little to broaden its core gameplay from the original game. Your eventual repertoire of items and skills matches the original game's almost to a T. Pokémon food, interactivity balls, music to play, we've seen it all before. And yeah, New Pokémon Snap is still a very scripted experience, strictly moving the player from point to point, offering mild interactions with the creatures of the islands via the player's equipment. The mechanics haven't changed much at all, and that might be the game's open announcement of pulling the strings of nostalgia. The devs know that the fans of the original Pokémon Snap are watching closely, so it makes sense to keep things familiar. Still, the few mechanical changes do feel a tad inconsequential. Yeah, scanning for clues to great photo ops and even finding additional paths are welcome, but New Pokémon Snap feels tightly tied to its own tradition. The new title feels like a bit of a misnomer. That is, until you start exploring the stages themselves. It's no secret that Pokémon has had a tough time with breaking ground lately, which is what makes New Pokémon Snap's plethora of surprising interactions all the more valuable. The stages appear denser with far more going on than before. Pokémon that wander even the more spacious areas have so much more liveliness and interaction than I ever would have expected prior to playing this game. Sure, some later stages take the spaciousness to a bit of an extreme, but with a much wider spread of Pokémon to choose from, New Pokémon Snap emphasizes the more organic parts of Pokémon as a series. I've said it before, but Pokémon Snap has been an opportunity for the monsters to truly feel untouched by human influence, and it left the entire world feeling so much more natural than it ever could be under RPG rules. And with the larger variety of Pokémon, representation across the generations is extravagant, and surprises are extremely plentiful. As a fan of Generation 5, I was happy to see Frillish dancing together in the depths of the seabed, or Trubbish chilling out at the research camp. Even regional variants like Alolan Raichu show up throughout the stages. These little appearances are a joy to experience and grow into larger set pieces once they interact with other Pokémon, or if the player uses their items thoughtfully and curiously. Getting a great looking photo is the cherry on top, the perfect way to immortalize these set pieces. However, I don't think set pieces is really the right word for this. While there is a level of planning and purpose to each of these instances, I think a better phrasing to use in this context is moments. Pokémon Snap has always been an experience focused on developing moments. Seeing a Pikachu move over to a rolling Electrode only to have it run atop the Electrode left me with a big smile on my face, validating my curiosity and investigative thinking with a scene that both gets high scores and results in something pretty adorable to see. Despite the limitations imposed on the player's direction, moveset, and overall agency, these little interactions pop up frequently in Pokemon Snap as a series, and under a critical eye could be what truly shape its identity. Pokemon Snap really is a series about moments, whether you're discovering them spontaneously or carefully setting them up to nail that perfect shot. The inevitable evaluation of your work is where the gamification of the photography mechanics has always been both the most essential, but also the most frustrating. Professor Mirror's scoring system still has its own little quirks, and not simply because of grading that can feel inconsistent. He's definitely more forgiving compared to the rigid judgment of Professor Oak in the original Pokemon Snap, but the focus on 4 separate pose designations can come across as shameless padding, especially considering that each star ranking is still being graded from Bronze to Platinum. That means that if you're looking to fully complete the game, the courses will need a lot of replays. Repetition is bound to sink in. That being said, giving a more concrete distinction between the different poses does offer a stronger focus on experimenting with the Pokemon's interactions and seeing what exactly you'll find when exploring each course. Investigating unusual behavior, keeping a sharp eye and ear out for environmental cues, and using your repertoire of items wisely is rewarding on its own. Mirror's grading is just that extra context in explaining just how out of the ordinary these moments appear to be. It's here where the requests tend to intrude upon this vision. What should be a rare or shocking moment caught on film, one that could easily be bragging rights back in the day, feels telegraphed in ways that don't retain that sense of mystique. For example, saving the 3 Jigglypuff in the N64 Originals cave section led to the rescued monsters performing a concert at the stage's end, which offered a cute little show but also a high-scoring photo opportunity. In addition to being a bit tricky to successfully reach, you still need to fend off the Coughings in pursuit to rescue Jigglypuff. It wasn't entirely obvious of what this could lead to. The inconspicuity of these moments made them feel special, so while I can see the appeal of making these hidden opportunities easier to find, many of them just feel too easy to decipher. This misstep is a healthy reminder of Pokemon's roots, where rumors and secrets were talked about on the blacktop at recess, where every kid was scouring what limited info they could find to discover everything they could about the Pokemon universe. In an age where the internet wasn't analyzing every single detail about a game, Pokemon in general built itself on cultivating communities of wannabe researchers and experts, so finding some untapped well of secrecy was so incredible. Pokemon Snap on the Nintendo 64 closely held this philosophy. It was never 100% clear of what you'd see, so there was a constant encouragement to experiment, to find those memorable moments that are worth sharing. Sure, there were occasional hints like Pokemon signs and the cover of the Pokemon Report, but Pokemon Snap didn't rely on these tricks much at all. Uncovering a Scyther hidden in the tall grass, knocking a Charmeleon into a lava pit to have it evolve into a Charizard, these instances wouldn't be nearly as valuable if there was some explicit clue to their existence. The hints in new Pokemon Snap aren't egregious, and maybe they're to compensate for our constantly connected online culture, where secrets are much easier to uncover, but they sap away what should be a discovery worth talking about. Interestingly enough, toning down the telegraphing would also give more credit to the level designers, who would have to designate their creative efforts into stronger environmental cues and even a grander sense of progression across a stage's length. Without that, you have a good idea of what to look out for, so that mystery isn't always as pure and untouched as what original Pokemon Snap confidently held. In fairness, new Pokemon Snap doesn't abandon that appeal entirely. The levels gradually grow in scope from one to the next, and even with the scan function, there is a small sense of mystery preserved. This is shown best when revisiting stages with higher stage ranks, where Pokemon openly act differently not just toward each other, but toward the player as well. Pichu and Grookey show up at the beginning of the park nervous and cautious when you first appear, but later ranks have them happily greet you before wandering off. Scorbunny playfully wanders the park, kicking up flames and riding atop sleeping Pokemon, culminating in the higher-ranked expedition where all 3 are happily hanging out at the park's end. The higher stage ranks also have new Pokemon pepper the landscape, interacting with other Pokemon and offering new chances for striking photographs. It's a bold and impressive way to build upon established level structures, balancing familiarity with a cool sense of, for lack of a better term, evolution to the stages themselves. With the series still being so limited when it comes to mechanics, new Pokemon Snap instead draws the player closer via its stage design. However, the limited literal Pokemon evolution is difficult to excuse, since the original Pokemon Snap did have on-the-spot changes from one Pokemon to the next. The earlier mentioned Charmeleon to Charizard moment of the original may have been a stretch of the imagination, but it left the Pokemon as dynamic entities themselves in addition to the world around them. Some Pokemon evolved by the player's input, and others evolved based on interacting with other Pokemon. With evolution being so downplayed, new Pokemon Snap doesn't tell those micro stories and limits how dynamically the creatures feel in the context of the world itself. I do like seeing the environments change with higher ranks though. A Bidoof Dam growing with each new exploratory level has the same kind of progression as seeing a Magikarp emerge as a Gyarados in a single stage, but they aren't interchangeable. The latter are moments of spectacle and volatility that feel missed in a game where progression is underlined so clearly. And the Illumina spot sequences where the player chases giant Illumina Pokemon to get a prime shot don't feel nearly as dynamic as the main tracks. They act as boss fights of sorts, isolating the player's attention down. While the Pokemon's expressiveness is preserved here, there isn't nearly as much to discover when chasing down these giants. The main expeditions have plenty of diversity and interaction amongst the Pokemon, but with limited actions from the targets and aesthetically flat environments, the Illumina spots don't have the same appeal. It's admirable to see some more focused approaches to new Pokemon Snap stages, and the mechanical reference to Mew on the Rainbow Cloud feels nostalgic in a more subtle way. But these stages become pretty typical and lack much of the main stage's sense of discovery. Focusing on building the world with a much wider scope of Pokemon to interact with is really new Pokemon Snap's strongest growth. This on-rails puzzle shooter hybrid doesn't do much at all to diversify it from the original on a mechanical level, but it also shows that you don't need groundbreaking mechanics to make a game feel fresh. Design-based evolution can be just as fulfilling, and within the constraints of the series, new Pokemon Snap stages are lively. For the most part, they pride themselves on memorable and incredibly charming moments that do a great job of selling the world of Pokemon. And with such a larger repertoire of monsters to use in the levels, you're bound to find at least a handful of pleasant surprises that will bring a smile to your face. It's pretty clear that Nintendo and Bandai Namco didn't want to reinvent the wheel with this sequel. The Pokemon universe has grown enormous since 1999, so in a way, a game like this can be considered a safe move. Simply resting on the fact that it's been so long since the original title allows the developers some leniency in crafting those new experiences. Not much needs to be done to make that trip home feel worthwhile after being away for so long. It's a bit crafty when you think about it, but it's tough to complain when new Pokemon Snap does deliver so much of the charm that made OG Pokemon Snap such a memorable title, even this long after that game's heyday. However, it does feel a bit more transparent when it comes to game objectives, lacking some of the mystery and curiosity that the request system doesn't prioritize as thoroughly. That and the diverted focus away from evolution keep new Pokemon Snap from reaching the same aspirations as the original title. Pokemon Snap, for all its simplicity, cast a longer shadow than I think many folks realize. What appeared as a simple but brilliantly effective way to bring Pokemon into 3D has shifted into a game that's only grown in appreciation as time's gone on. Whatever direction a sequel would take would be judged by pretty strict standards, and in all self-awareness, I can easily admit that composing my thoughts on new Pokemon Snap has been complicated. It stays very close to the original's established template, but by some strange process feels just as refreshing and fun as that first ride along the seaside was. Maybe it's the lusher, more vibrant world, maybe it's the wider selection of monsters. Whatever its spark might be, new Pokemon Snap remains a rich collective of moments that's a joy to play, even if it's still a bit stuck in its predecessor's shadow. If you're anxious to see what 20 plus years have done to change what's become a classic in the Pokemon catalog, rest assured that new Pokemon Snap does all it can to make that trip home as exciting and memorable as a Pokemon Safari could possibly be.